Everything's a copy of a copy of a copy of a copy. Deja vu.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Deja Reviewed podcast, where we talk about the original versions of TV shows that were later rebooted. This is season 1, which we're calling In the Zone, discussing the Twilight Zone. I'm Michael.
And I'm Mark.
And today we're talking about season 1, episode 18, titled The Last Flight. And The Last Flight was originally aired on February 5th, 1960. It was directed by William F. Claxton as William Claxton. It was written by Richard Matheson, and it stars Kenneth Haig, Alexander Scourby, and Simon Scott.
There is a fifth dimension.
Both shadow and substance of things and
Suddenly up ahead.
just crossed over. You're moving into what is another dimension.
Next stop, the Twilight Zone.
All right, and here's the Rod Serling opening voiceover from The Last Flight. Witness Flight Lieutenant William Terrence Decker, Royal Flying Corps, returning from a patrol somewhere over France. The year is 1917. The problem is that the lieutenant is hopelessly lost. Lieutenant Decker will soon discover that a man can be lost not only in terms of maps and miles, but also in time, and time in this case can be measured in eternity.
And from IMDb, their description is a World War I British fighter pilot lands at an American Air Force base in France 42 years in the future. And before,
Well, we've all been there.
yeah, and before we jump away from the description, I just wanted to point out, Mark, that Richard Matheson we've seen before. Now, we mentioned this when we talked about him before. He also wrote I Am Legend. And from the Twilight Zone, we've seen him he wrote And When the Sky Was Opened and Third from the Sun, which both had kind of a similar military feel to this episode. And this is only the third of 14 total Twilight Zone episodes that we're going to see that were written by Richard Matheson.
Okay, and well, those first two were the short stories he did, and this is the first one he's like writing as the TV episode, right?
Probably.
Yeah,
I
I looked up the same thing because I
Yeah.
recognized the name. This is also, while we're on him, this is only the second episode we've seen that was not written by Serling. We've seen several that were short stories that then he was the teleplay writer. The other was Perchance to Dream, which was written by Charles Beaumont.
Okay.
And Beaumont, Serling, and Matheson are three of the four people who wrote episodes in season 1. Matheson does 3, Beaumont does 4, Serling did 28.
150.
Just this season, there's 36
Right.
episodes in the first season, which is a longer season
Yes.
than you would have nowadays for sure. And then there's one person, Robert Presnell Jr., who wrote one episode that we haven't seen yet. It's called The Chaser. So Serling obviously did the vast majority, but Matheson did 3 plus the 2 that he did the short stories that they're based on. So he was at least partially responsible for 5.
Should we
of the
do a
first
toast, by
36.
the way? If there's 36 episodes, we're exactly halfway through the first season. Yay.
Yay.
I feel like we've been doing
Only
this for
5
5 years.
seasons to go. Congratulations to everyone who stuck with us this far. Only 150 more to go before we move on to our next show. I have a suspicion we're not going to get through all the episodes of The Twilight Zone. I think at some point we will have enough information that we can call it a wrap on that season of Deja Reviewed and move on to a new show. But we're still going strong on Twilight Zone for now.
Especially when the episode lengths increase to 1 hour episodes instead of 22-minute episodes. That's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I don't have that kind of time.
No. Before, again,
we all have that kind of time now since we're all
Right.
stuck at home.
Before we get away from the credits too, I wanted to point out that Lead Bottom, so the conceit of this episode, this pilot that finds himself out of time was trying to escape from being a wingman for this legendary British pilot that he goes back and saves, essentially. And the older British pilot, well, older in 42 years in the future or whatever it was played by Robert Warwick. His nickname was Lead Bottom. He was played by Robert Warwick. And I had to look it up because Warwick's IMDb profile picture was so old looking. He was born in 1878. And I'm thinking that's probably one of the oldest actors that we're going to see on The Twilight Zone and that we've seen to this point.
I mean, if he was born in 1878, so
He was
that's
his 80s, I
22
think.
plus 60, yeah.
Yeah.
Good for him, still acting.
Not only still acting, to this point, he had 250 acting credits on IMDb before when he died. And most of them were prior to this, which I'm assuming is probably because there were only like 4 actors that were working at the time that he started.
Well, but honestly, like you think about that, and that probably means he did a ton more because a lot of early stuff is not on IMDb.
Right.
They're pretty good with current stuff, but I mean stuff going back to when he would have started, and he would have been born, obviously long before television, but before there were movies.
Right. He was
Like,
there for
before
train.
the technology existed.
He was there for train entering station, as I always like to bring up on the.
You're a big fan of Train Entering Station.
I've never seen it. I'm waiting for the book version of it.
You know, and while we're just talking about these kind of details and stuff before we get into the plot of the episode itself, I wanted to mention something that I was inspired to look up and actually do some research. So I am breaking my vow to not do any homework on any of these episodes. But this was another episode with some great production value, particularly
Agreed.
outside stuff at the airport and all the planes, and having like the World War I plane alongside these sort of jet planes from the 60s and such.
Agreed.
Lots of extras, supplies, and everything. And so we've talked about this a few times and wondering, what was happening with the budgets. So I did a very minimal amount of homework and kind of looking up just kind of what the show's initial reception was. And it reminded me a little bit. Obviously, the scale of things were different because at that point you only had the 3 networks, so you didn't have all the different choices you have. But if something like Arrested Development or the early seasons of The Office here, and I don't know why I'm just naming sitcoms, those were the first 2 that came to my head, where they're very critically acclaimed, and the people who watch them really love them but have a hard time finding an audience at the start. So there were some great reviews from the premiere, which would have been the Where Is Everybody? Although usually the critics, at least today, I don't know how it was back then, have get a preview of a few episodes to write their reviews. Chicago Daily News said, "It's the only show on the air I actually look forward to. It's one series I will let interfere with other plans."
That person is jaded in 1959. Jesus.
The New York Herald Tribune said, "One of the best and most original anthology series of the year," which was interesting to me just because,
How many are there?
yeah, it implies there were a lot of anthology series going on, or it's damning with faint praise. Like, this is the best show called The Twilight Zone
Right.
I've seen this year. Daily Variety said, "The best that had ever been accomplished in half-hour film television." That's a pretty strong review. But they were having a hard time getting ratings, and Mr. Denton on Doomsday was down to about like 2/3 of the ratings they think they needed for the show to survive, and luckily it sort of picked up a little bit after that. And this is also back pre sort of general commercials when you had specific sponsors for the show, and the sponsors were General Foods and Kimberly Clark. Kimberly Clark is the maker of Huggies and Kleenex, and it's got toilet paper, and they bought them out.
They're bathroom
Which
products.
I know well. I worked at Kimberly Clark for a while, and I think at this point everyone in my family, in my immediate family, did a stint at Kimberly Clark, because that is where my dad worked before he retired. And they're kind of the big employer in the city where we live. They have their research facility in Neenah, Wisconsin, and a bunch of their plants also there. Anyway,
Let's note that we are not affiliated nor sponsored, and if we enter any Kimberly Clark competitions, we should qualify for them.
however, if Kimberly Clark would like to sponsor us, we would
love it.
certainly be open to that possibility and happy to be out of the running for any contests in exchange for money. Anyhow, so it basically, they pulled their ratings up enough to convince General Foods and Kimberly Clark to stay on as sponsors through the end of the season, although unclear if they would go beyond that. Here's the budget thing I found. And again, this is what I was able to find online without doing a ton of research, but piecing things together from a few different places. it sounds like their episode budgets were generally about $65,000, which would have been, I think, normal for the time. And that it wasn't that they got like a budget influx at some point. That whole first season, they were essentially operating on that same budget. Although it seems like there might have been that they, if they were doing episodes that could be done a little cheaper, they were able to reallocate some of that money to some of the more expensive episodes. But it is not, which we had speculated might have been the case, because we noticed a real jump in production value at one point. It is not that they got an influx of money. I think it really does seem to be that, the producers kind of figured out how to get more value for their money, and that some directors were much better or worse at kind of maximizing what they got out of that money.
But I do think that this was an expensive episode, because I agree with you. One of my first notes is that the production, this was a big production, and you could tell from the first 5 minutes of this episode. Granted, the interiors, there was basically just one interior set, but it didn't look like any stock footage to me of these fighter jets and this World War I plane, a fighter plane, propeller plane. It seemed like a big budget for this episode.
Yeah, and given what we've seen in some of the other episodes with some really bad stock footage, when we saw the first few shots of it where, things were kind of wide, I'm like, oh, they found some pretty good stock footage. And then they go in for closer shots. I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not stock footage. Right. They actually shot this stuff. I agree with you. This is probably one where they went over budget, because the other thing I found is that the show was notorious for going over budget like all the time.
Yeah.
And actually ran into some issues in some of the later seasons with the network because they kept going over budget. So
we've got another pan down from the intro Starfield of the Twilight Zone, which I'm sure you noticed, but I'm starting to think maybe that they just felt like that turned into their thing. And because I feel
maybe
like
that is their thing.
Yeah, I feel like we've seen it multiple in a row.
If any of my former students are listening, we will be technically correct, and that is a tilt down, not a pan down.
Damn it!
If a pan is side to side, and
okay.
that's on one of their test questions.
Fair enough. So a tilt down from the intro.
Yeah, I saw a great meme. Another film person shared that was shows like all the different types of camera moves and like an image of like what that looks like. And then it shows the same images and says like, what the producer or whatever asked for, and just says pan, just like it's yeah, easy. We're gonna pan down here, and then can you pan from here over here? Well, that's a dolly, sir. Yeah, then just pan over here. And anyhow, let's get to this episode itself.
Yeah. So one of the things right off the bat that I thought was kind of, considering the situation we're in right now, so this British pilot finds himself on this French and U.S. Air Force base in France. He basically comes out of the clouds. He's straight out of 1917, and everyone's trying to figure out what he's there for. The British guy, though, as he's looking around and seeing all this stuff on this Air Force base, he's amazed that the U.S. is so far ahead of them in technology. Mm-hmm. And I thought that was kind of funny. And right now, and as the U.S. seems to be lagging behind everywhere except Italy on the planet in fighting COVID, and that was nice that we maybe in 1960 were thought of as a technologically advanced nation instead of, I feel like we're all going to start hitting each other with sticks and rocks in a couple.
Well, now hold on a second. I saw in the news today we are leading the world in COVID-19.
That's true. We're kicking everyone's ass in number of cases, and we're not even testing everyone. So good job, everyone.
Way to go, US. Yeah, I will say I thought that was, I made a note on the same kind of thing and thought it was actually really clever. One of the things we often talk about, sometimes kind of snarkily because that's just our thing, is the reactions people have within the Twilight Zone and things that are totally bizarre that they just immediately accept, or they have a quick reaction of, wait, what's going on? Okay, it's fine. Like, right. To move the episode along. I thought this was a really smart reaction. They didn't immediately have him be like, wait, I've traveled back in time, or something that would be harder for your brain to wrap around. Like if you land on a base and start seeing all this much cooler technology, your first assumption is not, wow, I've traveled forward in time. Your first assumption is, wow, they're way ahead of us on technology. And I loved that.
I
thought
couldn't
it was
agree
a
more.
really smart approach to that.
And I think from the flip side, I thought the U.S. major and lieutenant or whoever also had a great reaction, because they were basically like, "What are you here for? Like is there like an air show in town?" Or like, because he's wearing this old uniform, they're like, "Are you here for like a play?" Like they're kind of rolling their eyes at him and just thinking he's crazy and making fun of him, which I thought was a good reaction on their part too.
Yeah, and even when it seems like even when they sort of get the idea, like, okay, he does think he's from 1917, they really still thought it, particularly the general, still thinks it's a prank or the guy's nuts or something. And that, I thought that was good too. I thought this was some of the more realistic reactions to how people would react in these situations that we've seen, as opposed to some earlier episodes where, oh, well, the devil just showed up in my room. Okay,
Right.
that seems fine. Yeah, let's chat. Like,
And
I thought their reactions were very credulous throughout, and their approach generally seemed reasonable. Like, what would you do in this situation?
I agreed to a point, because at one point they're like, "Well, what date is it?" He's like, "Well, March 5th." And he's like, "What year?" And he's like, "1917." He's like, "No, it's actually 1959." And I thought at that point there should have been a little more of an incredulous reaction from Decker, because he's like, "What?" that was a little bit lost, but I think that they earned enough goodwill from me, because they have to keep moving these episodes along. They earned enough goodwill from me by having very realistic responses up until that point, I thought.
Yeah, I did make it. I said Decker seems to take the news. It's 1959 pretty stoically.
Yeah.
I thought it was sort of like the and this may be an Americanized perception of it, but the sort of like typical British reserve, like something crazy is like, aha, I see. And like,
Good show.
just kinda like, what?
Yeah.
I am not going to do my British accent. The what year thing reminded me of, I know we've talked about Terminator before, but like one of the very beginning parts of the first Terminator movie, when Kyle Reese, Michael Baine's character, first shows up in the past, and he sees, some cop, and he like takes the cop's gun. He's like, what day is it? And the guy's like, it's Wednesday, March 17th. What year?
Yeah.
And the cop's like, huh? And then Michael Bain just like runs away.
Right. Yeah. While we're on that topic, I
Of
really
Michael Bain running away. Yes.
Well,
let's stay on that the rest of the episode.
of these pretty credulous reactions. I thought I liked the acting in this as a whole. And one of the things I want to point out about the Twilight Zone, that I was a little bit worried when we were watching this, that this was going to be very John Wayne, very melodramatic, very bad, like over aggressive acting. And for the most part, there's been a little bit of that, but for the most part, I think the acting has been a relatively modern feeling act. I mean, like, there's definitely certain tropes that their actors fall into, that just like I'm sure there are in modern acting, but for the most part, I feel like the acting has been pretty, it's not hard to watch the acting for the most part, which I was a little bit worried about going into this.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I thought the acting was good. There's some really nice facial reactions Decker does have when he's sort of first figuring out what's going on, where he's like looking around and confused, but not like over the top, like what the hell is going on, or like completely just okay, everything's fine. Like I thought that was nice. And when you're talking about the acting, the other thing that I think helped that with this particular episode, and I think generally most of the Twilight Zone episodes have had pretty good acting with what the actors had, with what the material was. This one, they got to dig a little deeper. It ultimately, the climax of the episode is essentially a character choice. It's not a plot twist or something like most of the episodes are. It's, the Major has the gun to Decker's head as Decker's in the plane, and the Major has to decide, like, do I really believe that he has traveled through time and needs to try to go back and save this other guy, or do I think he's full of it? And it's a character moment. And I don't want to say that there haven't been character moments in other episodes, because we've seen some really good ones, but this was one where that really they give away the Twilight Zone twist at the very beginning. The first voiceover is he's lost in time, and then very quickly on in the plot we've established that he's from 1917 and has now landed in 1959. But that's just sort of like the framework for really what comes down to, will Decker reveal like what he's afraid of, or what his ultimate thing is, that he's a coward and basically flew away from this fight and left his friend to get killed. Is he going to reveal that? And then does the Major believe him? And I really liked that for an episode that was a pretty incredulous or a pretty incredible thing to believe, that somebody flew into a cloud and came out and it was like 40 years later, and that involves time travel, which in itself is a complex thing that I've talked about before. I'm a huge fan of time travel movies and stuff. There's so much you can do with it, but that also can make your plots very convoluted and stuff. It really comes down to these sort of two characters and how they feel about each other, and do they trust each other, Decker enough to reveal like his cowardice, and the Major enough to let Decker go. And I know I'm rambling for a second. I just want to add one quick thing on that. There's a truism about time travel, that movies tend to get into trouble when they make the movie about time travel. And what you really want is the time travel is there in the movie, but it has to be about something else, about the characters. If it's Back to the Future, it's Marty McFly going and like seeing his parents and setting up their future, and it's about that family dynamic, and the time travel is just kind of a gimmick to get there. And I thought this was a really excellent example of that. Obviously the time travel is crucial to the plot, but it ultimately comes down to the characters and what they're going to do.
It's when you started talking about a character choice, I was surprised that you went with the Major's character choice, which definitely was a choice too, because the bigger character choice, and great character choice as well, was, and one of the notes I had about the acting is I really loved the confession, Decker's confession of his cowardice to the Major, and how the actor really embraced that. And so he also had to make a choice that like, look, I've got, and whether it was because I have to keep the space-time continuum in order or for whatever reason for his choice, he decided that he was no longer going to be a coward, and he was going to try and get back to saving old Leadbottom, which I thought was a really neat moment. And speaking of his acting, and maybe it's because of the nature of both of these episodes and these reaction shots, Decker, the actor who played Decker, reminded me a lot of Michael J. Fox, and frankly, a little bit of a cross between Michael J. Fox and Crispin Glover, which made the casting of Back to the Future even better to me. But his facial expressions, he had like a little dimple, a little butt chin, a little dimple in his chin. Like it wasn't as much his physical appearance, but his reactions were so really harkened me back to when Marty McFly is figuring out that he's gone back in time. Now this guy went forward in time. Well, not that Marty didn't later on, but he really reminded me of Michael J. Fox for a lot of this episode.
I love that connection that it was not his face itself, but the kind of reactions he made. I'll say what Decker's face reminded me a little bit of, and I might just be hung up on this because it's the second Twilight Zone where I've mentioned somebody reminding me of Kirk Douglas, but he looked like Kirk Douglas to me, a young Kirk Douglas.
I think it's just the butt chins that you keep noticing, because if the Kirk Douglas had that very, very detailed butt chin, and
I think that a little bit of in some of the key roles I think of Douglas in, it's the same sort of like stoicism and unflappableness that Decker had. So probably part of it's the performance and character as well.
Agreed.
Can I? So we're talking about the kind of reactions and how people dealt with things fairly realistically. I wanted to make one note, and I guess a criticism, although I was willing to go with it. After they first talk with Decker and find out he thinks he's from 1917 and blah, blah, and they sort of put him in another room, and the Major and the General are talking a little bit, and the Major says, well, we know what he said his orders were in his name. Like, this could be checked on, sir. And the General's like, yeah, if we wanted to waste the time. I'm like, really? It's not worth just like calling somebody to see if there's any chance this is true? Like, is that a huge amount of your resources to have to tell some subordinate pick up a phone and see if there's a Decker who was in the war in 1917 or whatever? I just thought that was a little funny. Like when he's like, if we wanted to waste the time, like it seems like it's probably worth it. But I would give the General kudos for being smarter than the Major in that the Major was basically like, either it's a prank or he's really from there, and the General was which you probably would want your general to do, thinking like, is there a potential espionage
Yeah.
reason someone would do this? And I thought that was like a reasonable, smart reaction to think about as a possibility.
My theory on the general, though, is he's like George Costanza, just trying to look busy at work. Because at one point he's like, "I've got too much to do to deal with all this stuff," and there's like nothing on his desk. Like he wasn't working on anything before. So that's my theory on the general. Let's take
Sure.
a quick break, and we'll be right back. Okay, we are back. One thing, Mark, I know you don't like research, but I sometimes like researching some of these things. At one point, Decker mentions a name that was very hard for me to pick up, and the major and the general are like, you mean the French fighter pilot? And so I had to look up and see who I thought he was referencing. So there was a French fighter pilot named George Guynemer, and I think it's like Guynemer, and he was this badass French pilot during World War I that went missing in action. He had 54 victories, which I assume means he shot down 54 planes, or maybe he won 54 dog fights or whatever. At the time, he went missing in action, disappeared, and then they confirmed this kid was only 22 when they confirmed he was dead. He was shot through the head. And when I found George Guynemer's Wikipedia, it specifically mentions this episode of The Twilight Zone. So I'm thinking that's who he meant, that he was referencing to he talks about this French pilot who had just disappeared and they couldn't find. And his whole thing is he went into this cloud, which, by the way, there's a hilarious moment in this episode. They're like, "Wait, was it a white cloud?" And they're like,
I was thinking
"Well,
the
yeah,
same thing.
it was a white cloud." Like, what
No,
other?
it was actually green.
Yeah,
It was
what-
really weird.
That was super strange. And that was kind of the, I guess, wormhole that he went through to get to 1959. So that French fighter pilot, it sounds like he's apparently a French hero. There's a, what do you call the palace, or the place by the Arc de Triomphe, wherever the main place in Paris is, there's a street named.
Champs-Élysées?
Yes, thank you. There's a street named after him. So that's where that came from. If you guys are interested in more, I'll try and remember to put a link in the show notes to his wiki.
Which you've generally been very good about those show notes, and thank you for that. It's
I just
helpful
fish
me
for
looking
that
back at
compliment
the
every
stuff we did.
episode.
You do. Well, there you go. Now you've got it. You'll never get it again. No, that is interesting. What we're talking about, sort of the actual historical elements of World War One. First off, just as soon as this is totally contemporary in the particular moment we happened to be in when they said he was from 1917, I immediately think of the movie
Yeah,
1917
true,
and the sort of World War One thing there. But also this, when you talked about that French pilot who died when he was 22 after all these victories and stuff, which shows kind of how much he had already been in the thick of things at that point. Reminds me of one of our previous episodes, I forget which, where we were talking about the world wars, and particularly World War One, which is, I think you had this great turn of phrase of like rich people throwing young men at the problems, or throwing young men's bodies at the problem. And in our at this point traditional line of, well, we're not a political podcast, but a lot of the discussion going on right now, coming from the president and some other people like our own lieutenant governor here in Texas, who we already knew was a moron and is just revealing that yet again and again, is this idea of kind of like the value of life, and like, well, if we're tanking the economy, that's no good. Like, let's just let a whole bunch of people die because we don't want the stock market to go down.
To be
And
fair,
I'm
they're not.
oversimplifying things a little bit, but not that much.
To be fair, they're no longer throwing young people at the problem. They're throwing
Now we're
old
throwing the
people at
old
the
people.
problem.
That's true. I saw a great headline that was today that was like, the pro-life party confirms that they really only care about life prior to birth.
Yeah, yeah.
Which again has also been true for some time if you look at their policies on capital punishment and all
Yeah.
sorts of other things. But it is interesting. You've heard the language used a lot about us being in a war against COVID-19, and I don't necessarily know that language is inaccurate. We're kind of throwing whatever resources we can at it and trying to protect people from getting killed by it and stuff like that. So fair enough. But it is a war where there's these, there's a real cost in human life, and then obviously there's a huge economic cost. I saw an interesting analysis today, and I can't remember if it was I can't remember who wrote it. Might have been in the Post. But somebody who studies basically the value of human life. Like, how do you put an economic value on that? Because
An actuary?
sometimes you have to, right? Like, what's that?
An actuary?
But yes, but it wasn't somebody who is an actuary. It's like somebody who studies actuarial science, like how actuaries do their work or something like that. And they work on some stuff that was particular to, like some sort of governmental decision. So for instance, like, okay, if we're gonna enforce this new safety law that would cost, this much to do and would save this many people, is it worth it or not? And as much as we would like to say you can't put a value in human life, there are real decisions that get made to do that, right? If we really said no, there's no way you can put a price on human life, anything to save people is worth it, then all of our cars would cost, $800,000, but they would be so safe that there'd be no way to get killed in them, right? So there are these trade-offs made. And anyway, the point they made was based on the data and stuff we have now, and this is right after the big stimulus bill just passed, I think last night or this morning, I forget exactly when, but it was earlier today. So those who are following the news can tell when we recorded this. By the time you're listening to it, it passed sometime.
You might already have your check that will last you 15 minutes if you
Right.
have a mortgage.
Well, so not arguing the merits or demerits of that bill. Their point was, for if people are complaining about this cost based on our best data that we have that we've used for other sort of governmental decisions and what people are really willing to, what price they're willing to put on it, we should be, based on the number of people we think are going to get killed, we should be throwing like $20 trillion at it, like a whole order of magnitude higher, which was just a really interesting kind of take. Like, at the same time as we're hearing people like, this is doing too much damage to the economy, just start sacrificing people. And like, well, actually, apparently, compared to other governmental and safety decisions we've made, it's doing far more damage to people than to the economy, and we should be doing more to try to stop it. I just thought that was an interesting take.
Yeah. Anyhow, let's go back to this episode.
Let's go back to this episode.
There are a couple of things.
If I can bring us back off of that, when we're talking about the war stuff, I know, Mike, you've talked a few times about how Serling's experience in war,
and he was a
affected
pilot.
his perspectives and stuff, and like I thought that was really coming through here. Like this Decker has a speech where he's kind of revealing his cowardice and his background that I thought was just really profound, and got at, I think, this very universal sort of human feeling, but also really seemed to come from a place of truth of somebody who had been in battle and seen that. And I have to think that was, even though this wasn't an episode written by Serling, I felt that influence.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think, one of our strongest human instincts is to preserve our own safety. So, and going to war and being a pilot, and especially back in those days where you were a lot more likely to be killed in war because there was not a lot less drones and a lot less button pushing, is those soldiers are trained to literally do the exact opposite of that. So I could never fault, you think about Saving Private Ryan with Hopham, when he's just sitting there cowering in the corner.
I actually wrote the same note from Saving Private Ryan, exactly with you.
So, yeah, I mean, as much as you're like, oh, he's such a coward, it's like, oh my God, I would have shat my pants 15 times if I were ever a fighter pilot in World War I. Especially since like they barely knew how planes worked back then. It's like, well, you're going to go up in this metal tube and fire bullets at the other metal tube and hope that they hit them more than you get hit. It's crazy.
Yeah. He had this. Can I read one part of his sort of speech there? Said, I got by. He's talking about how he, pretended that he was like everybody else and that he was, eager to go kill people and stuff.
Brave.
That I got by with my pretending well enough. My kind of strained idiocy is exactly the brand we all put on. Playing a part, Boys on a lark, laughing, joking, drinking, it's all too much, all of it, and then turning into deadly ice-cold killers in the sky. Although not me, of course.
And the crazy thing, I mean, we mentioned Guinemer, the French pilot, was already dead at 22. I know who I was from the ages of 18 to 22, and I cannot imagine the emotional strain. Now, granted, the people died a lot sooner, so 22 felt a lot older than, but I cannot imagine having to go through that and be responsible for killing 54 people by the age of 22, whether it's for your country or not. It's emotionally overwhelming.
And 1917 was 100 plus years ago, but we're not talking about like the Middle Ages or like 20,000 years ago where your life expectancy is 30. Like you still had a good long life ahead of you at 22.
You definitely weren't middle-aged at 22, maybe a third of your age.
I mean, I was middle-aged at 22 because I had a hard first 22 years. You know, and he shares this thing, and I'm right there with you. Like I would not have survived 10 seconds in a plane, you know, or really in war or battle, whatever. I just haven't. I can't imagine that. And Decker shares this story, and I was really genuinely curious how the Major would react to it, because there was, you know, it was this real human emotion that I think we can all understand, but also the Major is a military man, and I could see also really being offended, like, yes, I get it, but we all are doing this, and the fact that you know, were derelict in your duty and just left your fellow guy to die, like I could see him going either way on it. It was this really interesting moment where, again, it was curiosity at a character choice, like how the Major would feel about Decker after that.
Yeah. There were a couple things in this episode that reminded me of previous Twilight Zone episodes, which we've already seen, that I just wanted to point out. One of them, I like when they kind of have, in comedy, it's just playing the straight man, when they have the kind of audience stand in, be like, well, wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And wait a minute, this doesn't make sense. And in this episode, I think it was the Major. And it reminded me of the end of Judgment Night when the U-boat commander is talking to his subordinate, and the subordinate's like, well, wait a minute, couldn't this have happened? Couldn't this have happened? And I like that, having that they actually just kind of insert the audience's voice into some of these Twilight Zone episodes. And I thought this was a good example of that. And then I also thought of, there was another, I mean, let's put it a little bit in air quotes, but there was another fight scene in this episode when when Decker is fleeing to get to his plane he essentially runs away from the base, gets in his plane to try and save Iron or Lead Bottom. And the other fight scene was that I kind of say quote unquote fight scene that we saw was Third from the Sun, which was also written by Matheson. So I thought that was kind of an interesting parallel when they were going to break in to steal the experimental ship and get off of the planet, which they eventually were driving toward Earth, was the big reveal. But there was a better fight scene, I will say.
In both cases, it was literally someone like going onto an airfield, fighting somebody to get in a flying ship they're not supposed to and try to escape, and there's someone there with a gun to stop them. I mean,
right.
Pretty strong plot parallel there.
Right.
For all the things we've loved about the Twilight Zone, this one was better. I would say their fight and stunt choreography is not the strong suit of this episode thus far, or of this series. I mean, you mentioned that he sort of flees their prison, but it's an act of bravery in this case, not of cowardice, because he's fleeing to go get back in his plane, fly back in the cloud. He thinks that'll transport him back to 1917, and he'll be able to help.
Well, it was the only
Mackay.
It was the only white cloud in the sky, so he knew which one. Yeah, it was Mackay, something like that.
Something like that.
I'll look that up while you're talking.
But so that's what he was going to do, which it turns out he does do, because then we see him fly off. We don't know what happens, but we stay in 1959, and we see the now older Mackay. It is Mackay. Mackay.
Yeah.
Okay. Show up and like, yes, this is what happened. Like, I thought he flew away, and then he came back out of this cloud and saved my life. And so we sort of reveal it worked. What I did think here is, as much as we were talking about the credulity of their reactions to things through most of this, I thought it was pretty incredible how easily they not only accepted the idea here that he had traveled back in time, but like sort of figured out the time travel mechanics of like, wait, if I go back, that's why he's still alive, because I'm supposed to go back and close this loophole in time. And so I was like, they jumped to that really quick for people who I imagined had not, in 1917 as a fighter pilot, I would not think you're, studying a ton of time travel.
And
that was a little, I was like, okay, I see where this is going, and I'll pull the Mike Brock card and say, but I've been exposed to a ton more time travel than these people had, and I thought he jumped to figuring that out really quickly.
And I had the same kind of note. There was another sort of time paradoxy thing that reminded me of all of those. Back to the Future, Lost. But one of them that it kind of reminded me of, to a lesser extent, was Quantum Leap. And it's not that Decker went back into someone else's body like Al did, or that Sam did on Quantum Leap. But there was always the line in Quantum Leap was always trying to put right what once went wrong. And this didn't go wrong, so that apparently, because the McKay was still alive, but he got to redeem himself. I thought that was a cool arc, that Decker got to redeem himself by going back and being the one that saved McKay. And then when McKay does show up to the base, because that was the whole thing, that he was coming for this visit to this Air Force base. And when he does, they're like, oh, have you ever heard of Decker? And he's like, oh yeah, that guy saved my life. And it was kind of a neat moment too, I thought, at the end, when they had his stuff, that they gave his stuff, showed his stuff to McKay, that they had confiscated from him. Right. Yeah. And they had even pointed out that apparently German pilots were big about essentially taking trophies from pilots they had shot down. Although I don't know if they meant that they were taking trophies or they were collecting them and sending them back to...
I would like to think that it was they were collecting them and sending them back, kind of like, still, like, even within the war there are the sort of rules of respect for the enemies and stuff like that. No, that was a really, and from a time travel movie book story aficionado, does aficionado mean I'm like good at it or like it? Because I want the one that means I like to read and watch.
Say fanatic then.
That sounds like I'm crazy.
You are.
Well, I am. Fair enough. Okay. As a time travel movie book fanatic, I liked that little closing of it. Like, yeah, the reason they never recovered it was because when he gets back in the plane, he doesn't have it because he left it in 1959.
Right. Yeah, that was nice. A neat moment.
Yeah. I want to reference two other things that this connected me with, or that I connected based on this. That's the scene where he's about to leave and the Major has the gun on him. Which I already mentioned, I like how it's a character choice, reminded me of Crimson Tide or of the beginning of War Games, where if you remember the very beginning of it, when they're like doing a test and they send a message to their people who are working in the missile silos, basically saying like, we're at war, launch the missiles. And, most of them refused to push the button, which of course was not actually going to launch. It was a test. But even when given the direct order, like, people just couldn't bring themselves to do that. And it was the same thing here. Like, the Major has this choice of like, do I do what my duty is supposed to do, or what sort of my gut human morality tells me is right?
Yeah.
And the Crimson Tide, of course, the similar thing of, although in that case, I think had they been able to get confirmation of the orders, then Denzel Washington would have been okay with it. But he was like, this is a huge deal, until, like, we can't do it until we can confirm this, even though we've been ordered to. So I thought that's a really interesting, and again, maybe speaking to experience in the war. And I wonder if Matheson was also a soldier as well.
That's a good question.
In this time frame, it would be reasonable that many adult males would have served in World War I or World War II.
And even young males. Well, I guess no. At this point, they're adults.
Adults in the 1960s would have. So that was cool. And then the other thing that I just thought was a cool kind of precursor to is Maverick in Top Gun during the final battle, where he sort of like, chickens out, flies away, and then like, gets his act together and comes back and saves Iceman, is how I'm imagining this battle went when Mackay, he even says, he's like, yeah, I thought he was just ditching me and flew off, and then he comes back in and takes out these planes.
And he even said, he's like, he came out of nowhere and then of course he took out like 3 planes and then died himself. It was neat. It was a neat episode.
When he's going to start the plane, I had just forgotten. It's been so long since I had seen anyone do this, but the old prop planes, you actually have to like grab the propeller and like give it a turn to get it going. That's not all automatic.
And he kicks his leg
fun.
up really high in the air to get momentum to pull the thing. I thought that was kind of funny too.
But I was willing to buy that was realistic, that you have
Yeah,
to actually
for sure.
have a propeller and you need to do it.
It's a big
It
propeller.
looked kind of like he was like up there like doing some ballet exercise.
Yeah, it totally. Well, should we start winding this thing up, Mark, with the closing narration then?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. And I just want to point out something about this closing narration. As to my knowledge, this is the first closing narration that we see that is mostly someone else's words, not Serling's words. So I'll just go ahead and read it. Dialogue from a play, Hamlet to Horatio. There are more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Dialogue from a play written long before men took to the sky. There are more things in heaven and earth and in the sky than perhaps can be dreamt of. And somewhere in between heaven, the sky, and the earth lies the Twilight Zone. I thought that was kind of neat to take a quote from Hamlet and adapt it into the closing narration.
Yeah, and this is one, sometimes where you felt like the Twilight Zone at the end has been a little shoehorned in.
Right.
I really like that. Somewhere between heaven, the sky, and the earth lies the Twilight Zone. That's super cool.
It was very good. And we always talk of Serling as a poet in and of himself. So for him to be quoting Hamlet was pretty appropriate, I thought, for it.
And I wonder, I don't know the answer on episodes where the script was written by somebody else. I mean, obviously, Serling, I'm sure is supervising and tweaking things in the writer's room as the, creator and head of the show. But I wonder if he always wrote his own voiceovers or if whoever like was writing the episode, if it was someone else, would also write the voiceover.
Yeah, that's a good question. Because like some of them, I feel like there's been a couple of ones that have not really felt as Serling-y that maybe they were from somebody else.
Although since he wrote almost every episode, I would think
True.
The odds are those ones were also written by Serling.
True. Should we rank our sweat?
Yeah. I don't know. What did you think?
I have this as, and remember, this is on a very detailed scale of 1 to 10. The only time I actually noticed sweat was when Decker flees the outside and goes and starts his plane. And so he's running, and then he gets in the plane. He's a little sweaty, and then there's a fight, and then the major runs up, and he's a little sweaty, which seemed pretty
seems justified since they both just ran, though.
Yeah. So
the only other
had
time
a
I
2.
noticed was sorry, what was your number?
I had a 2.
Yeah, I'll go maybe a 3 because I also noticed when Decker first starts getting interrogated, he's like a little bit sweaty.
Okay.
But also he's being interrogated and realizing things are not. So yeah, I would be fine with a 2 or a 3. So. It seemed reasonable when they were sweaty.
Let me see if
Let's
I can.
go 2.5.
Judgment Night was a 3. Perchance to Dream was a 2. Walking Distance and Escape Clause were 2s. Mr. Denton was a 3. We have to go 2 if Mr. Denton was a 3.
I think we screwed up on Mr. Denton in hindsight. Mr. Denton should have been much higher.
Whereas everybody is a 3, and he was also running around. I think a 3 is pretty reasonable, but we should retcon Mr. Denton.
Yeah, I think that I think
right, let's say 3.
Those first couple episodes, we had not yet determined the proper scaling of the sweat scale.
Fair enough. Okay, so we're giving it a 3.
Let's rate the actual episode.
Yeah, and I'll start off and just say that I like this one a lot. I would give it a 4 because I thought this was a good, enjoyable episode. And it was weird because this had a very Twilight Zone-y feel to it. But other than the time travel, which I know is a big but, it wasn't that Twilight. There weren't aliens and spaceships and all that stuff. It was, and like you said, it was a very character-driven episode. Mm-hmm. I would like it as a 4. Do you want to hear some? Well, tell me what you think first.
This might be the rare episode. I feel like I'm usually talking you down. I would give this a 4.5 or a 5. I really liked this one. I thought the production value was good. The acting was good. It was an interesting story and interesting character stuff. And I like time travel things. So I'm gonna give it a 4.5.
Okay. So 4.5s are 1 for the Angels and When the Sky Was Opened. And coincidentally, and When the Sky Was Opened, and Third from the Sun, we gave Matheson's other 2 episodes that we've seen so far were also 4.5s. The other 4s that we've given are 16mm Shrine, and looks like just that one. So I'd be down for a 4.5.
Yeah, I feel like this is in there. And I was thinking about maybe a 5, and I can't go quite there because I feel like we're really reserving that for like the best of the best.
Judgment Night.
And this was strong, but not quite there.
Judgment Night is the only one we've given a 5 so far.
Yeah, and I think Judgment Night was as well made, but like really more interesting in some of the deeper
agreed.
things it made you think about than this.
And
Let's give him some kudos for. It is a pretty interesting, like, and pretty well self-contained time travel piece without sort of obvious paradoxes and stuff, which is hard to do just in and of itself.
yeah, it was a good episode. It was a good, fun episode, which I was glad about after not another one that we weren't super our least favorite episode. Let's just say our lowest ranked episode was the one we just had to deal with before this one.
No,
So
man, coming off of the fever, that was the one I watched and I'm like, well, I'm gonna have to go ahead and watch the next one because that's just like too grim to leave off on.
So Mark, are you ready to guess what our next episode is about?
Yes,
Just based on the title. So next week's the title of episode 18 is The Purple Testament. Good luck.
Wait, this was episode 18, I thought.
I'm sorry. Yes, episode 19 is The Purple Testament. You're right.
That's just me stalling for time. I'm going to say that somebody's will is written on purple paper.
Ooh.
And that, last will and testament, and that the will has some bizarre condition somebody has to do to get something.
Oh, like sleep a night in a haunted house?
I'm definitely thinking sleep a night in a haunted house.
Isn't that the only one that everyone always has? Well,
I feel like I need to rewrite my will to have something about somebody sleeping in a haunted house. Just that feels like too good an opportunity to pass up.
Especially in this climate, everyone check your wills and make sure they're updated.
Right. Not even joking. I was talking about that with my brother-in-law, and we're like, yeah, just we've been checking things, and like, you're getting our kids if we die, right? He's like, yeah, I think so. I'm like, okay.
Cool. Bye. Well, we are going to find out next week, Mark, because that is the end of this episode. So thank you all for listening. This was Deja Reviewed. As we mentioned, next week's episode is episode 19 of season 1 of The Twilight Zone, titled The Purple Testament. Feel free to leave us a rating and a comment wherever you're listening to us, or you can find us at dejareview.com, where you can leave us a voicemail or a text message, and we really would love if someone would do that, because I would love to respond to those. And we hope that you tune in next week.
Deja Review.